And that is a wrap on Democratic Primary Debate 5. We are back on YouTube and Facebook to take a look at what happened.
So we have got a wide variety of friends who are joining the show in a little bit, including journalist Zed Jelani and Bernie Sanders senior advisor Chuck Rocha. Right now, though, Jamal Simmons, he's host of Why You Should Care and The Remedy. He's at the desk with us. Jamal, what are your first thoughts? What are you thinking?
Well, it was a long debate.
Yeah,
Debates go on and on and on.
Yeah, this one felt especially long.
Especially.
I mean, what, 20 minutes over time? And
Yeah.
It was ready to end about a half hour ago.
Yeah.
I do like how it started, though. There were a couple things that came up that I thought were important. Cory Booker came up, and I think we got some sound on this. Cory Booker started out the debate talking about entrepreneurship and aspiration. You don't hear in the Democratic debates a lot of conversation about aspiration, personal wealth building, that kind of thing. There's a lot of talk about people who are struggling and trying to make it, which is an important part of the community in the Democratic Party. But there's another part of the community of people who are, you know, they're working and they got like a side job. They're working and they want to really get some money to build that company from the one person business they might have to a bigger person they might have. So I think I'd love to see what Cory Booker had to say.
Senator Booker, do you agree with that strategy?
Well, first of all, I think we all agree that we need to bring in a lot more revenue in this country. We actually have a real problem with the tax rates, tax loopholes, tax cheats. And I don't agree with the wealth tax the way that Elizabeth Warren puts it. But I agree that we need to raise the estate tax. We need to tax capital gains as ordinary income, real strategies will increase revenue. But here's the challenge. We as Democrats need to fight for a just taxation system. But as I travel around the country, we Democrats also have to talk about how to grow wealth as well. When I stood in church recently and asked folks in a black church, how many people here want to be entrepreneurs, half the church raised their hands. If we as a country don't start, if we have a party don't start talking not just about how to tax wealth, but to give more people opportunities to create wealth, to grow businesses, to have their American dream. Because, yeah, we need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. But the people in communities I frequent, their not aspiration for their lives is not just to have those fair wages. They want to have an economy that provides not just equalities in wealth, but they want to have equalities of opportunity.
You know, and this is a geographic problem that he's talking about as well as a demographic problem. He kind of goes into this a little bit in the second slide after this, that 75% of the money spent in investment income is spent in 3 places: California, Massachusetts, and New York.
True.
And for women, particularly African-American women, who are among the biggest business creators in the country, the average white guy who starts a tech company can raise $1.3 million. The average black woman, $36,000.
All totally
it's a huge
true.
problem.
But
Let's remember the context of this answer.
Well, here's the thing for me. When I hear that answer, it sounds like the same, you know, lauding of the American dream, fantasy,
People love the American dream?
meritocratic nonsense that the donor class loves to feed us. It's pablum. I mean, he didn't say anything.
Love the American
but he
dream.
didn't say anything about how to get there.
Remember
it's without any substance.
Well, he does talk about investment, and people do love the American dream. The reality is,
this was said in the context of him coming out against the wealth tax, and I do think that is the important
When
thing.
This is a country of people. This is a country of people who have exactly, and wealth is power. And so the more people who have more wealth means that they can use that wealth as a lever to get the systems of power to work on behalf of the community.
But it's a fantasy to think you can do that without doing the other. That you can do it without hurting the donor class, and that's the thing.
And so
nobody says you can't. You can't. Or you shouldn't.
He's arguing against the wealth tax here, but I want to zoom out a little bit. First of all, to talk about the debate overall, which was terrible, I have to say. Like the moderators were terrible.
That's my first take.
There were obvious things that were missed here. Elizabeth Warren gets asked no questions on her new Medicare for All transition plan. Obvious miss there.
Terrible.
Pete Buttigieg gets asked 0 questions about his Douglas plan, which had fake black supporters on it.
And let's remember, Kamala had the chance to hit him on it and was like,
stumbled and wouldn't do it.
I think we're going to play that shot in a little bit, but that sound of that in a little bit. But yeah, you're right, Crystal, which is the debate was handled terribly. It was 2 hours. What was the first thing? What did I predict? That we would spend an inordinate, stupid amount of time talking about impeachment, something that every single one of these candidates agrees upon.
Yeah, but but Democrats care about impeachment. It would be crazy to have it. It would be crazy. I absolutely do. It would be crazy to have. Have you seen the Democratic caucus? Have you seen the Democratic caucus? It would be absolutely crazy to have a debate on the day that we had the biggest revelations about Donald Trump's culpability and to not talk about impeachment.
But here's the thing. None of them disagree.
Right.
And you know what? When they're on the trail, they don't get asked about impeachment
they don't talk about it
ever.
at all.
When you ask Democratic voters what their number one issue is, it's not impeachment. And so when you have a limited amount of time and you have this many candidates on the stage, focus in on where there are differences. And even let's put impeachment aside, that we spent time on rally chants.
And lock him up chants. Exactly.
Lock him
that
up
was another
chants.
one that was ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
I mean, again, this comes in the context of the same week that Elizabeth Warren releases a Medicare for All transition plan, which is seen as a massive flip-flop, saying that she's option and then she's going to have Medicare for All maybe in her third term. And the moderators don't ask a single question. The only Medicare for All question that she got was to defend the underlying policy of Medicare for All. And I got to say, I mean, Bernie, he dropped the ball here. He did not.
He didn't pick it up and
He
go
did
after
not
her.
criticize and take the opportunity to hit her on it. The only thing that he seems comfortable going after any of these other candidates on is Joe Biden on the Iraq War. It's really strange. It's like that's the one thing that he's willing to kind of step out there and go after somebody else on the stage. But everything else, he pretty much played himself how he usually does. He did his campaign rally thing. I don't think anybody on the stage moved tonight. I don't think anybody moved.
Here's what I would say. Look, going into this, I said most of these debates are about who the affluent white liberals are going to like out in the debate. Biden's got his core group. He did fine. I actually thought his close, I have to admit, was pretty good.
Didn't try
American dream in there.
He didn't talk that much, so that's always a plus. But he was fine. Nothing's going to change for him. Bernie was fine. He was strong in certain. I thought he was very strong in foreign policy. I thought he was very strong in hitting Biden. But is he really going to change his poll numbers from this? Probably not. So let's talk about the centrists and let's talk about Elizabeth Warren. I didn't think that Warren had a great night here. There was nothing that was like a huge problem, but she was kind of quiet. There was no standout moments. And on the other hand, while I think that Pete is an empty suit with nothing to say and made some abhorrent attacks on Tulsi Gabbard, which we'll talk about later, I think the pundits are going to like his performance. They're going to see Pistol Pete again, and it would not surprise me if he continues his ascent in the polls. I also think, as I predicted earlier, that the pundits are still going to try to make Amy Klobuchar a thing, even though I just don't
Amazing
see it.
Amy.
She's got these awkward one-liners, but she came out with her awkward one-liners and did her thing, and they've wanted her to be a thing this whole time. I think you're going to see another push for her.
That's right.
Yeah, I think Pete Buttigieg actually at the end, I mean, I know you guys are going to get into it later. I think what he did at the end is he showed that when you fired him, he fires back. He may have gone like one fire back too many, started to see maybe like a little bit petty, but they came for him and he came back. I think the entire debate was lacking because nobody really went for each other.
No.
I mean, there were long stretches of just people giving their campaign rally speeches and talking points and not really engaging each other. And we could have had a much better hour and a half.
That's where I fault the moderators the most, which is it's your job to learn about the policy issues in which candidates disagree the most, and then in order to basically start contrast between them. And I mean, they did that correctly between Kamala Harris and with Tulsi Gabbard, but they didn't do anything about Medicare. I cannot believe they didn't have a Medicare for All tee-up between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. I can't believe that Kamala didn't take that opportunity on the Douglas plan and that the moderators didn't press him on it as a follow-up question. It was ridiculous if they didn't do that.
Yeah, and even when Sanders did go after Joe Biden on the Iraq War, rather than the moderators going back to him and saying, hey, what's your explanation? Because remember, Joe Biden was not just another guy in the Senate. He was the leader of the Senate.
He skated by.
Of the foreign relations. He was an important, crucial part of that whole run-up to that war.
Right.
And they don't follow up with him?
For the record, we've had 3 presidential campaigns since the Iraq War. No person who supported the Iraq War has become president.
Right, and that's a great point. And I mean, I'm glad Bernie continues to make that point. I mean, here's the other thing with the MSNBCs, these questions. I mean, focusing on like how are we all gonna like love each other again? Again, like maybe that's a time for a general presidential debate. There are 10 candidates on this stage. It is your job to come in here and to differentiate. And there just wasn't of that. That was the other thing. They were asking like Tom Steyer about housing. They were asking Tulsi about like climate change. And I'm not saying it isn't important to get candidates of generally one stripe on different issues, but you got to tailor it up at the same time.
We've also got to say, once again, Andrew Yang completely ignored, right?
Yeah.
Here
it was a half hour till he talked.
Here he is,
literally.
one of the most interesting candidates in the race, and once again, he barely even gets acknowledged. And I also want to say his closing statement was also excellent, talking about being a parent and a patriot, how he didn't imagine himself as president because he's not insane, but he wanted to step up to do the right thing for his kids in the future. You know, I think the American people would like to hear a lot more from him, and certainly by the amount of money they've been giving to his campaign, that is certainly the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I mean, he had the best closing statement by far out of any other candidates, in my opinion. I mean, it was heterodox. It was right to the core of his campaign. Our kids are not all right. His is very much like a future-centric thing. He also had a phenomenal answer about AI and China. I thought it was a really clever way of saying, yeah, I'm qualified to be commander-in-chief because I see the problems of the future. Again, he didn't do what he's been doing with his commercials. He didn't pivot to the whole centrist Medicare for all. He was like, no, like all about UBI, all about automation, all about the future. Very strong performance.
But pitching as a parent, that lands with a broader group of people as well. Jamal, thank you.
Thanks, Jamal. Thank you, guys.
Next up, we've got Senator Bernie Sanders advisor Chuck Rocha. First, though, we're going to take a look at some of the senator's performance. We actually thought he had a really strong answer on that first question about impeachment. Let's take a listen.
Well, Rachel, sadly, we have a president who is not only a pathological liar, he is likely the most corrupt president in the modern history of America. But we cannot simply be consumed by Donald Trump. Because if we are, you know what? We're going to lose the election. Right now, you got 87 million people who have no health insurance or are underinsured. We're facing the great existential crisis of our time in terms of climate change. You got 500,000 people sleeping out on the street, and you got 18 million people paying half of their limited incomes for housing. What the American people understand is that the Congress can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. In other words, we can deal with Trump's corruption, but we also have to stand up for the working families of this country. We also have to stand up to the fact that our political system is corrupt, dominated by a handful of billionaires, and that our economy is rigged with 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. We can do it all when we rally the American people in the cause of justice.
Joining us now at our debate night table is Senator Bernie Sanders' senior advisor, friend of the show, Chuck Rocha. Chuck, what did you think of your candidate tonight? What was some of the highlights for you? What did you think?
I mean, I think the clip that you just played kind of laid the groundwork for everybody, right?
Yeah.
What happens with pundits on TV, and you love when I talk about this, Crystal, is not many of them have actually run campaigns before or know anything about how.
To voters in 10 years.
No. Yeah. They probably teach a class somewhere at Harvard or some other nice college, right?
IOP fellow.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. But what they don't do is they don't travel around the country, or they're not from East Texas, or they haven't spent much time in Kentucky. And I'll look at Crystal because she's actually been in the coal mine. She's been out there with people. Is that when you're in these rallies and you think that Bernie Sanders supporters, some of the most rabid and crazy and wonderful activists out there, are like all about impeaching Donald Trump. Anybody with half a brain knows that this president should be impeached. They come up to you and go, yeah, impeach him. Yeah, that's good. But talk to me about my health care, right? I think about the small business person like me whose I got my health care statement today that said, starting in January, my premium's going up another $150 as a small LLC from $800 a month to $950. That's like real time. Luckily, I'm blessed. I'm fortunate. I see my privilege. I can pay that. But what about the regular folks? Like, that's what people are really talking about out there on the ground.
I think that's right, Chuck. I mean, that was you heard our criticism earlier, which is that, focusing so much time on impeachment, a thing that none of the candidates disagree upon, was really a disservice to the voters. I mean, I really do think that coming out of this debate, I mean, I didn't see a chance, frankly, for them to differentiate themselves. A lot of it was just like, there were not setups available for them to really shine.
Jumping around from topic to topic, never following up on anything, Senator Sanders didn't have a whole lot of time to talk anyway.
Right.
But I did think he had a strong contrast with the vice president on the Iraq War, which is an incredibly important issue, one of the worst strategic blunders, certainly of our generation, possibly in American history. Just talk about that moment and the kind of the senator's thinking around that.
The senator has a lot of respect for the former vice president, but there's differences between their policy statements. And I think that's how you saw it. When he started, he's like, my friend Joe, we disagree on this. But Joe Biden wants to be seen as the senior statement on foreign policy, and on day one he walks in and everybody's going to whip into line. Well, Senator Sanders is just saying, when you had the opportunity to cast a vote, your vote was wrong.
Yeah.
And it's wrong with 80% of the Democratic base.
You know, we actually have a little bit of that. Let's take a listen.
Right.
One of the big differences between the vice president and myself is he supported the terrible war in Iraq, and I helped lead the opposition against it. And not only that, I voted against the very first Gulf War as well. And I think we need a foreign policy which understands who our enemies are, that we don't have to spend more money on the military than the next 10 nations combined. But to answer your question, yeah, I think it is time, after spending many trillions of dollars on these endless wars, which have resulted in more dislocation and mass migrations and pain in that region, it is time to bring our troops home. But unlike Trump, I will not do it through a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning. I will do it working with the international community, and if it's necessary to negotiate with the Taliban, of course, we will do that. But at the end of the day, we have to rethink the entire war on terror, which has caused so much pain and lost so many lives, not only for our own men and women in the armed forces, but for people in that region as well.
That was a major shot across the bow at the military-industrial complex there, Chuck. I think that was the strongest that we've seen Senator Sanders on foreign policy in any of these debates.
People forget that Bernie Sanders is the ranking member on the Senate, in the Veterans Committee in the U.S. Senate.
Right.
Like, he knows a lot about this issue.
Right.
He cares immensely about our veterans, but he also sees a lot of the mistakes and the lives that have lost for no reason. So this is something he knows a lot about and he speaks to. But when you're out there on the trail, he encompasses that with all the issues that people are talking about. You have to show leadership. This is mainly not as much around foreign policy, but having the leadership to be very frank and very, very open.
Well, and speaking of that, the moment maybe out of all of them that jumped out at me is he was answering another question on foreign policy. It wasn't about Israel and Palestine.
Right.
And he intentionally took the conversation to Israel and Palestine and advocated for Palestinian human rights. Now, having been in politics for a long time, that is very dangerous terrain. It's very unusual for an American politician to go out of their way to speak up for Palestinians. And so, to your point, his leadership on foreign policy, I feel like he has really articulated that more forcefully this time around. There was a knock on him in 2016 that he didn't like to talk about foreign policy. He only wanted to focus on domestic policy. This time around, he really has established a leadership position in this race on foreign policy, and a great distinction from Joe Biden, and I would say, frankly, most of the rest of the field, honestly.
If you ask me where the two places where we've grown this campaign from 15 and 16 when I was there before, there was two things we could have done better. One is the foreign policy piece that you see him kind of leaning into, and the second piece is the closing argument on his story, on the immigrant father, the importance of bringing that piece together, on wanting to stand against all this stuff that's happening, anti-immigrant, anti-this, but making it very personal.
Was that like, did you have to get him there? I mean, what was, because he's reluctant to talk about these things. I mean, was this an internal discussion of you need to bring these out? How
I'll let you a little bit behind the curtain tonight. Tonight was all him. That wasn't that wasn't written down. That was him talking from the heart. I was back in the back room and I texted a fellow senior advisor and I was like, for the person who does a lot of immigration work and a lot of work with the Latino community, I was like, nicely done. And I got a nice message back that said, that was all him, brother.
Yeah.
Like that was not what none of us had written down. He did that on his own because that's where his heart was. And that's really who he is.
I really expected that to come from you, Chuck. I've got to say, I mean, I'll ask, why does he not take more opportunities to contrast himself, particularly with Senator Warren on Medicare for All? I mean, tonight, if there was ever going to be a time to really contrast, I think it probably would have been, and he didn't take that opportunity.
There's been a lot of discussions within the campaign talking about when's the right strategic time to get more with all the rest of the candidates, not just Senator Warren. But I think as you see this reduced down to a manageable group, if there's such a thing, in December and January, I think you're going to see a lot more contrast with lots of folks, because right now the voters, strategically, back to the campaign mind, in Iowa really aren't paying attention as closely as they will be in December. And oh my gosh, even so much more as we get towards a February 3rd caucus. So January is when you're going to see most of that contrast, when voters are still early enough for them to remember that contrast.
What do you make of the Mayor Pete rise? You've got him at the top of the polls in Iowa now. There was one poll in New Hampshire. It was kind of a BS poll. I mean, we dug in. Sample size was like non-existent, et cetera.
Well, the media
but he's
ran
on
wild
the rise.
That's
the media loves him. They're going to love him tonight again. You know, they always ignore Bernie. What do you make of his?
Here we go. We're going to take that curtain and we're going to roll that curtain back. And I'm going to tell you some 101 in campaigning. 101 is that in the great state of Iowa, Mayor Pete has spent 10-to-1 on TV what anybody else has spent on television. Almost 15-to-1 to Elizabeth Warren. Wow. So his trajectory is absolutely about that, and he spent a ton of his money in making a gamble that may pay off or may not pay off, but he is all in on a one-state strategy, and he is putting a lot of money and resources in there. And he's built out lots of field offices. I take nothing away from him in his campaign, but you can very much see from an old political operative exactly what they're doing, and 10-to-1 on TV will move your poll numbers.
That'll move the needle.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Chuck, great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congrats. That was a good night for your guy.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. All right, we are going to bring in now journalist Zed Jelani. He's here. He's bringing his best analysis and his Twitter takes. Before that, though, we wanted to highlight this moment that stood out to me at tonight's debate, that exchange between Tulsi Gabbard and Mayor Pete, of course.
Does not qualify us to serve as commander-in-chief. I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels. As commander-in-chief, leader of our armed forces, I bring extensive experience serving for 7 years in Congress, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, meeting with leaders of countries around the world, working with military commanders of different commands, dealing with high-level national security briefings, understanding what's necessary, the preparation that I've gotten to walk in on day one to serve as Commander-in-Chief.
Congresswoman, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll allow you to respond.
I know that it's par for the course in Washington to take remarks out of context, but that is outlandish even by the standards of today's politics.
Are you saying that you didn't say that?
I was talking about U.S.-Mexico cooperation. We've been doing security cooperation with Mexico for years, with law enforcement cooperation and a military relationship that could continue to be developed with training relationships, for example. Do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not what I said.
All right, and now to respond to that and all of the rest of the debate antics is Zed Jelani, journalist. Great to see you, sir.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, great to see you.
What did you make of this particular exchange? I mean, Tulsi had a heated exchange with Kamala. There's a lot of bad blood there. We'll get into that in a moment. But, you know, this was interesting because Mayor Pete did, in fact, say he would be open to sending our military into Mexico. She was not mischaracterizing his statement there, even though he tried to make it seem like she was.
No, that is exactly what he said. I think his campaign later clarified that this would be a last resort, but it's interesting what we discussed prior to getting to that. I mean, for one, we don't talk seriously about ending the drug war. I mean, drug cartels are fueled by prohibition, partly. Not entirely by prohibition, but at least partly. I mean, that is something that should be on the table. We should be talking about reforms like that before we're talking about, you know, doubling down on counterinsurgency type strategies that all over the world tend to fail because they're dealing with things that essentially have political problems, that are essentially political solutions.
Right. And so what did you think generally, Zed, about Pete Buttigieg's and hitting her on Assad? I mean, I thought, you know, it's like, how many times do we have to have a redux of this same conversation over and over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, 4 years ago, I wrote one of the kind of banner critical articles about Tulsi Gabbard and her foreign policy for Alternate. I think since then she's adjusted herself quite a bit. I think she responded to a lot of that criticism fairly, moved away from some of the right-wing actors in India, for instance. I don't think that you should criticize someone just for being willing to sit down with a foreign leader. Nancy Pelosi has sit down with Assad. John Kerry has sit down with Assad. And by the way, we have thousands of U.S. troops in Syria. We should probably be talking to the person who runs the country. It doesn't mean that we love them or agree with them or even think they're a good person.
Right. And here's the thing. I don't have a problem with critiquing her on policy or even critiquing her on this meeting. You know, I think it was a bit naive the way she went about it, and Assad has used it as basically propaganda in his country. But that's not what's done here. It's always just done as a smear, as a way to just dismiss her. I mean, Kamala said said that it was I think she said it was a disgrace that she was on the stage.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just outlandish that because you hold a different view of how we should be, prosecuting these wars, how we should be interacting on the global stage, that you should just be completely disqualified, or that you go on Fox News. I've been on Fox News. I mean, that you should just be completely disqualified from running for president as a Democrat. To me, it's absurd. And I will say, from the political calculus, I think there's a certain constituency for what Kamala did to Tulsi. I think there's a certain constituency for what Pete did to Tulsi. But their hatred for her only helps her. And that's what we saw in the exchange with Hillary. Yeah. Tulsi went up in the polls. She got more donors. She got a lot more press attention. These exchanges only help Tulsi.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, she's a candidate at 2 or 3%. It only elevates her to have these fights with someone who's now leading in Iowa,
right.
Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, another thing I really want to talk with you about, Zed, was Medicare for All. I mean, the MSNBC really did us a disservice with a lack of critical questioning here on Medicare for All. I mean, Elizabeth Warren comes out with this transition plan, essentially adopts the Pete Buttigieg plan for health care. And all she has asked is to have an underlying policy. She's asked to defend Medicare for All as a concept. I mean, just talk about that from a missed opportunity in terms of the question.
Well, it's interesting because Warren's trying to have it both ways. One, she's saying she's basically going to enact the Pete Buttigieg plan in the first 100 days, first year in office. But then 3 years later, after the midterms, maybe she'll enact the Bernie Sanders plan. Right. It's like she can kind of get voters on both sides.
Yes.
And maybe as a politician, she can get away with that if MSNBC is not going to ask her any questions about it. But it's the other thing I noticed is that she keeps referring to her wealth tax as 2 cents.
Yeah.
In order to fund health care, she said she would raise it to 6 cents.
That's right. So why over $1 billion.
So why exactly did she go back to 2 cents? Is it just, does it sound better to say 2 instead of 6, or is she not as committed to getting that Bernie Sanders component in the plan through, which needs all the extra funding?
I mean, I think we know the answer to that. Yeah. She's clear, like anyone who's proposing to pass Medicare for All 3 years down the road after the midterms, if we get immigration reform, if we get the public option, is not serious about passing Medicare for All.
In Annie Linsky's story in the Washington Post, they quoted an unnamed Warren advisor who said that she never anticipated being asked about the details.
I think I probably stole that.
The details of the most important domestic issue to voters. Yeah. That speaks a little bit to Warren's political.
Well, and I've got a plan for that candidate. Right. Wouldn't realize that on the #1 issue that voters consistently tell pollsters they care about, that she wouldn't have to have a plan.
And once again, impeachment questions, how are we all going to get along, lock him up chance at rallies, not enough time for something like this. Same thing on the Douglas plan, right? So Pete Buttigieg in Atlanta, who we were talking about in the pre-show, one of the historic black cities in this country, is not asked about how his Douglas plan was endorsements by people who did not support him, and then Kamala Harris does not take the opportunity to hit him on that.
And by the way, I don't know if this was in Ryan Grimm's story or not, but one of the advisors who he touts in this plan worked for the McChrystal Group. He's a consultant. He used to work for Michael Bloomberg as an educational policy consultant. And being in Atlanta, I grew up outside Atlanta. I did a lot of reporting in Atlanta. It's not just a white versus black issue. There's a multiracial elite in Atlanta. It includes a lot of black people. And there's a multiracial poor in Atlanta that includes a lot of black people. And I think when you're listening to one set of those people versus the other, it's not just a racial, it's not just a racial heuristic. There's also a heuristic you have to think about, which is that there is a group of people who have worldviews aligned with economic elites, and those people are the kind of people that Pete Buttigieg, I think, was listening to when he crafted the plan. The plan itself doesn't, it really does feel like something Michael Bloomberg would write. Right. You can name it after Frederick Douglass, or you can name it after Michael Bloomberg. The Bloomberg plan.
And how about the fact also, and this is again new reporting from the Intercept's Akilah Lacey today, that his Douglas plan calls for 25% minority business ownership. He was at South Bend, it was 3% in terms of what contracts were awarded. And I just, here he is. The media loves to call him a front runner now. I think that's ridiculous when you're at 0% support with African Americans. You are not a front runner in the Democratic primary. They love to call him a front runner. They certainly didn't treat him like it tonight in terms of receiving even one challenging question about his record as mayor of South Bend or what he would do as president.
I think that's part of the musical chair kind of game the media is playing. For a while, Warren has the chair, kind of build her up. That's the narrative. That's the momentum. Okay, they got bored of her a little bit. Now we're going to Pete. But I think it also speaks to the candidates themselves. I think someone like a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren really can't advance themselves in this race without having that killer instinct of actually going after people. And I will say, whatever disagreements you have with Mayor Pete, I think he does have that killer instinct. He does tend to use these debates to elevate himself, to go on the offensive, to defend himself, I think, fairly effectively at times. And yeah, I think the media is helping him a lot. It's inflating it a lot. But I do think he kind of understands it's a contest. It's not just something you get up there and you kind of recite your stump speech, which I feel like Sanders and Warren are doing more or less.
I use that point all the time. I also got it from you, which is that Bernie treats these debates as campaign rallies. They're not campaign rallies. That's what a rally is for. Debates are for differentiation. They're for going after and showing why it's a zero-sum game, right? That's how votes are.
Right.
And ultimately, if Warren and if Sanders cannot do this, it's not going to be anything. But thank you so much for joining us, Ed. We really appreciate it.
I think Zed's sticking with us, aren't you? Are you sticking around?
Maybe. We'll figure it out.
We'll find out. All right, we've got another bite we want to throw too. We've got Kamala versus Tulsi. We mentioned it a little while earlier. Let's take a listen to that.
As president, I will end this foreign policy, end these regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War and arms race, and instead invest our hard-earned taxpayer dollars actually into serving the needs of the American people right here at home.
Senator Harris, any response?
Oh, sure. I think that it's unfortunate that we have someone on the stage who is attempting to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, who during the Obama administration spent 4 years full-time on Fox News criticizing President Obama.
That's
who
ridiculous,
has spent full-time criticizing people on this stage as affiliated with the Democratic Party. When Donald Trump was elected, not even sworn in, buddied up to Steve Bannon to get a meeting with Donald Trump in the Trump Tower, fails to call a war criminal by what he is as a war criminal, and then spends full time during the course of this campaign, again, criticizing the Democratic Party. What we need on the stage in November is someone who has the ability to win. And by that, we need someone on that stage who has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, and someone who has the ability to rebuild the Obama coalition and bring the party and the nation together. I believe I am that candidate.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Gabbard, I'll give you a chance to respond.
What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies and smears and innuendos because she cannot challenge the substance of the argument that I'm making, the leadership and the change that I'm seeking to bring.
It is time to bring in the best panel around. Team Rising. Tonight's special debate edition includes Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman and Colin Rogero, Senior Director of Policy for the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, and Sanders Senior Advisor Chuck Rocha. We wouldn't let him leave.
Right.
He thought he was out the door. We pulled him back in.
I was already outside.
Okay, but now the Bernie Sanders hat, the pundit hat is on. I mean, you're still Sanders guy, but we know you know how to. You know how to.
For me to talk trash on other people, I have no problem.
Okay, all right, good. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah. Colin, did we miss you, Colin? You're here?
Okay, I'm here. Yes, I was announced.
Okay,
we're good.
Everybody's present.
Present.
My mind is beginning to fail.
I'm sorry.
It's
late. We do a morning show and then it's late. Anyway, all right.
You sound like somebody on the debate stage right now.
Yes.
So I wanted to start with we just played that bite between Tulsi and Kamala. We played earlier the bite between Tulsi and Pete. Rachel, let me go to you on this one. I mean, I saw on my Twitter feed, like, why is she always attacking other Democrats? Which she keeps consistently getting attacked, smeared, etc. for this meeting that she had with Assad, which, whatever you think of that, every time she does an interview, every time she's on debate stage, she is relentlessly attacked for this and dismissed and made like she can't even run for president because she goes on Fox News. I think it's absurd.
Yeah.
Look, what the substance of the debate between Kamala and Tulsi, I think, is the substance of our foreign policy debate across the aisle. Right? Like whether we're going to engage, who we're going to engage with, how restrained or unrestrained we're going to be. And what you saw Kamala come back at her with was platitudes. Yeah. She didn't engage on the substance. And so, I think unless, Tulsi could have roundhouse kicked her to the head, that maybe that was it. But the answers were not given, I think, that the broader Democrat Party wants to hear, and a lot of Republicans as well.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point.
There's a reason she has crossover support.
Exactly, and
because this is an a left-right issue.
Right.
Exactly, and that's why, I mean, you heard Tulsi and Sanders. I mean, Tulsi could have given Bernie's answer about we're going to end these endless wars.
Yeah.
I mean, look, that is where 80% of the American public is. Colin, I want to go to you. What do you think? Who do you think had a strong night tonight, if any? I think it was generally kind of a snooze, and nobody's really going to move. But that's where
I'm with you. My best description of these debates right now is that there's too many.
Yeah, they are.
And it kind of seems like a heavyweight fight between a couple of fighters who are out of shape in about the 11th round.
Yeah.
It's slow and sloppy and a little boring.
Especially Biden v. Steyer. I was like, no, nobody wants this.
Yes.
Literally
Last
nobody
debate,
asked for
it was
this.
Pete versus Betsy.
Yeah.
We're like, why?
Turn it off.
And all the boomers just keep yelling.
Yeah, I know.
They do. But I will give a compliment to I think one of the MVPs on the stage tonight, which was Bernie's hair. It was in place and brushed. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. Well done, sir.
I take no credit for the hair.
Chuck, I do actually want to throw to you because, you know, what we've been talking about is this white affluent liberal group is what's really up for grabs. They watch CNN, they watch MSNBC, they take what, you know, people like Chris Cillizza say very seriously. The working class base of Bernie Sanders, the working class base of Joe Biden, they're pretty much in place. They're there. They like their guy. They're not shifting around so much. So I was looking at, and you were looking at, the headlines that the mainstream press is posting right now, because I feel like they watch a different debate every time than what I watch. Politico goes with Buttigieg counterpunches as rivals take aim at his rising candidacy. Who took aim at him? I was dying for someone to take aim at him.
Exactly. They're all looking for a breakout moment, and they're all jumping on. As I had said earlier, for all of you who were tuned in to watch the beginning of this program, Pete Buttigieg has spent 10-1 on TV. If you spend 10-1 of anybody on TV, Cristobal would be in Congress right now if she'd outspent 10-1 when she ran a Democratic primary.
By the way,
that's how that works.
I got more votes in my race than Pete Buttigieg got for Delaware by like 10 times, literally.
I was opening that door to see if he would walk through it. Welcome into the party.
Here we go. 11,000 votes. Andrew, what did you think generally of tonight? Who were the winners?
I think it was a good night for those four front runners on that stage tonight. I mean, look, I was not expecting what we saw tonight, which was, as people have said, a sleepy debate. The reality was, I thought Pete Buttigieg was going to get hammered, and he was going to have to duck and cover, and we were going to see how he was going to. And I agree with you. He did not face much at all, and I think that's a huge moment for him, because he didn't have to defend much at all, and he had some good moments.
And this, I really fault MSNBC. They did not set up these questions properly. They did not go after, they should have had a Bernie and a Warren, going off on Medicare for all. They should have had, Pete and Tulsi, she had to take it to Pete, right? Like, they didn't set it up properly.
I feel like each time you go after the moderators, because last time it was like, well, why'd they set it up?
It's bad.
But I also think that candidates had a moment to go after Pete or go after Warren on Medicare. They didn't do that.
They teed it up for Kamala.
They did, to the point about the moderators. She had him dead to rights.
Right.
They gave it to her softball, and she couldn't even, she fumbled. She whiffed.
But this is why Kamala has, her candidacy has stumbled. She has not picked the right moments. I thought she did have a few lines tonight that were better for her than her previous debate since the first debate where she tussled with Joe Biden. But she doesn't pick the right moments, and that's why I don't think we see her getting the votes.
It's not just she doesn't pick the right moments. I think she's not good on her feet. Yeah. So if she wasn't prepared with that Pete line of attack, she didn't know what to do with it.
Instagram ready. She didn't have the T-shirts ready to go.
But Chuck, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's a conscious strategy? Because Pete, Warren, Kamala, Corey, they all share a very similar base of voters. So as Pete has gone up, Warren has gone down, right? When Warren was rising, Kamala was going down. So there is a lot to be gained from dinging him and taking some of his growing support. Why do you think that these candidates didn't have any interest in doing that tonight?
I think it may go back to what I said earlier about it being a little bit early in Iowa, but I will say this, and we talked about this in the green room, is that as a person of color, she was the perfect one to land that, and she's the only one on that stage who could have landed that blow, missed opportunity.
Corey could have done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Corey could have pulled that off.
Yeah. But I'll also give
He's all about love.
I'll also give her credit for touching the third rail of Democratic politics, which is saying that the Democratic Party is taking people of color for advantage and not taking our vote seriously. Yeah. And I think that that's a real thing. Working in Democratic politics for 30 years, I'm the first one to say that we've done a lot of things wrong and that we all run to black churches when it gets close to election time or start talking about immigration with Latinos. Like, her calling that out is good for her in South Carolina, where she's losing African American votes by a big part. But you got to do more than that. But that was I'm glad that she brought that up tonight.
What's really strange about it, Rachel, is that she's competing for Pete's voters. Like, and it's like, why would you not take that opportunity? Not only is it tailor-made for you, right, Chuck? These white liberals abandon Warren and Kamala for Pete. It's a zero-sum game whenever it comes to that support, and she didn't take the bait.
Well, and she has seen it work for her before, right? We saw it in the first debate. She had it teed up and ready to go. This is so bad on Pete Buttigieg's.
Yes, it's terrible.
I mean, not only is half your endorsements of black Americans white, but you stock voters from Kenya. I mean, it doesn't get any worse. Right? Yeah. Like, she literally stuttered through her answer and said, no, he's apologized, it's fine.
The prominent African Americans who were listed as sponsors of this thing, when Ryan Grimm called them to be like, do you back this? They were like, no, we don't back him, we don't back this. One of them is Sanders, co-chair in the debate. I mean, and okay, put aside, like, that's wrong in terms of taking the community for granted. It's also embarrassing politics 101. How do you not think you're going to get called on that when one of the guys is literally Sanders co-chair in South Carolina?
I think it speaks to how quickly people that weren't prepared to build out the organization, we talk about on the morning program a lot of times, you have to be able to run very quickly, and it's fixing to speed up a lot more. And I know that the two guys sitting across me have seen this on all the campaigns that they've worked on, but this thing's fixing to really speed up, and you're going to see a separation, back to Feldman's point about the top four, right? So you got to have enough money now to make it through and be looking past Iowa. That's why Pete's doubling down with the 10-1 in Iowa, but the real campaigns that will be here in March, in Super Tuesday, will be the ones who've built that out and did the TV like we've talked about, and now there will be a separation.
Andrew, we were talking about this earlier. So I think it was a big mistake for Bernie in particular not to take that opportunity to take it to Elizabeth Warren on Medicare for all. And Chuck, to Chuck's point, there's a lot of people on the stage, and you'll see more contrast maybe when people drop out. But this is a tailor-made, ready moment for him. And outside of Tulsi and Kamala and Tulsi and Pete, there was no real contrast.
Look, Bernie's just not ready to do it, right? Yeah. Him and Senator Warren are personal friends. They talk about this all the time. And if you're going to go after a personal friend, you got to be ready to do it. And clearly, that just wasn't where the senator's head was at tonight. I think that's okay. I think the senator had a fine debate. I thought Warren did well as well in explaining more than she has in previous debates about her health care plan. And I think that was important. At the same time, look, Kamala, I got to tell you, I don't think she wanted to hit Pete because she couldn't. No. Well, reason why? She couldn't handle what he was going to throw back at her because he knows how to move on his feet. And we saw what happened when Tulsi Gabbard hit her a few debates ago. And that was her.
And she still has
that was still her
answer on that.
Correct. He would have come back at the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Colin, what do you think changes? I'm going to make a prediction. I thought Warren had an okay night. I didn't think she was particularly good. I think the punditocracy clearly loved what Pete had on offer. And he was feisty out there. He didn't get any incoming fire, et cetera, et cetera. So I think he's going to continue his rise based on the media fuel here. But, what, if anything, do you think changes in the polls?
I think absolutely nothing changes after this debate. I think it was flat, and it was a missed opportunity for anyone who's in the 4 and 5% range to not try to have a breakout moment. These four people are kind of locked in. It's going to shift around some, but if you're in the back, you got to throw long to get to the front. Like, that's your point here, especially when Iowa's coming up, which is a caucus state. That was the missed opportunity. Other than that, the top three front runners are going to go up and down 2-3 points from now till the end of Iowa.
To that point, let's talk a little bit about, I would say Corey and Amy in particular, they're right on the bubble. The money's kind of running dry. They're sort of stuck in the polls. Rachel, do you think that they did what they need to do to continue on and ultimately make it to Iowa?
I think the moderators really tried to make Amy Klobuchar happen. Amy Klobuchar really tried to make Amy Klobuchar happen.
And the one-liners about the ex-boyfriend
and she's really trying. And Cory Booker, is begging to be on the next debate stage. He is always trying to get that breakout.
Literally, his closing statement was like, please put me on the stage.
Which I respect, actually.
Me too.
If you're going to use the moment,
Not a great place to be.
That's where we are. But 3 things, can I just mention that I was really hoping they would talk about tonight that they didn't. One is Medicare for all. I know you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, mentioned more details. I would say she didn't mention enough. The Democrat Party is split on this issue. New polling suggests that you have half for Medicare for all, half for public option. We need to have it out. Like, this party needs to have it out and see where they are. Second is immigration. You have DACA being argued before the Supreme Court. This is a huge area Trump has been involved. Like, I wanted more.
2 debates in a row.
Two debates. We haven't talked about it. This issue broke Gallup records this year by being the highest issue that people cared about for the longest length of time. And then third, I would just say, abortion. We touched on it very quickly at the end. But again, this is an issue where the Trump administration has done a lot. And so, what do these candidates plan to do when they take office to either keep or
one other I would throw in there as well is, we were in a foreign policy section, we had an exchange on Iraq, whatever, and then they go to Elizabeth Warren and they just asked her about service. Now, this is someone who hasn't articulated a foreign policy vision. I mean, we know very little. She responded to what's going on in Bolivia with this very sort of mealy-mouthed, milquetoast thing. She seems to just go with whatever the kind of establishment conventional wisdom is, but listen, if you're going to be commander-in-chief, those are some awesome powers you're going to have to exercise around the world. Colin, we should know more about where Elizabeth Warren stands, and that was another moderator completely missed opportunity to get any kind of insight into how she would actually be as commander-in-chief.
Yeah, I agree with that. And part of her not addressing it on the front end is she's had a plan for everything. Now, some of those needed some fleshing out, but when you get into these complicated foreign affairs issues, they become incredibly complex, and you can't box them in with a plan that's financed by this and that. It's actually really difficult work, and it's stuff that's done behind the scenes, so it's not easy for her to talk about. And quite frankly, I don't think it's going to win the debates. What I think we should be talking about are, like you guys just said, DACA and Medicare for all. These we have separation on. These we can actually talk about between the 4 frontrunners. Let's get the 4 frontrunners hashing out health care for us.
I mean, that was the thing. I saw you, Chuck, you were nodding your head. There was like the moderators wanted Amy to happen so badly. It's like they were just like, please throw the centrist, throw
she tried.
Magic.
Amy, be great.
She tried.
In the first hour, you could just look at the number of responses she got. Senator Sanders is in the top, number 1, number 2, maybe number 3, depending on which polls, all of them, right? Like, he should get a little time to explain it. We just wrote out the most comprehensive immigration plan in the history of presidential politics. I'd love to have the time to talk about that, to Colin's point. It's on people's mind. Let's debate our differences between our policies. I know you have a plan. Let's talk about your plan and my plan and the differences.
Well, and with some controversial elements there, too. But, I mean, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the person who always gets screwed in the time, which is Andrew Yang.
Yes. I was waiting for you to mention his name.
And he had, I thought the answers he gave were good. I thought his closing was phenomenal.
That's one.
And yet, once again, Andrew, here he is. Look, whether you agree with his perspective or not, he is one of the most fascinating candidates, if not the most fascinating candidate on the stage. He's bested senators. He's bested governors. He's got a true grassroots movement. He's got money. He's going to be in Iowa. He's going to be in New Hampshire. The American people want to know more about this guy.
I think what you see with that is, and what you think about the first 4, is that, especially with Mayor Pete and with Senator Warren, is they're all going after the same vote, right? And so you have these prime voters that we all target. We know vote in every primary. So those folks are 20 here, 20 there, all pretty even. We're all those 4 at the top. The key to this, to your Yang point, is that there's a group of new voters who've come of age under Donald Trump who nobody's talking to. That Yang is reaching through the internet, through things, who we are talking to, who are a big part of our donor base. That will be the key to who wins Iowa. I would take you back to nobody seeing Barack Obama coming, because he brought new people to the caucus. Whoever does that in Iowa is probably going to be the nominee, because you get the springboard in New Hampshire.
He's also touching issues that nobody else is touching. He touched AI. He's talking just big tech. He's talking all these issues that this voter base, this millennial Gen Z voter base, cares about. That Joe Biden, isn't going to be.
He didn't even try and pitch his website.
I don't think, in the moments though that Andrew Yang had to speak, I don't think he nailed them as he did in previous debates, right? Regardless of what you think of Andrew Yang, in previous debates, you stood here last debate and thought he was the best person on that stage. I don't think we got that from him tonight. I actually do think we're going to have it's going to be tough for him to make the next debate stage, especially as you've seen the polls start lagging for him a bit.
I actually think he might have already qualified for December.
Not yet.
Not December.
Not yet. I will say there's a common thread between, the media hates Tulsi, obviously. They ignore your guy. They, totally ignore Andrew Yang. He barely gets.
They didn't even put him on graphics on MSNBC.
It's all the people who go against the establishment. I mean, this is not an accident that those are the three, because these are three very different candidates, right? I mean, not to say that there isn't overlap. They have very different perspectives in different places on the ideological spectrum, but they all have one thing in common. They dare to go against the establishment.
You're answering your own question about why they don't go after each other.
Yeah.
Because they all have to, if you're going to take somebody down, somebody's going to need those donors. And whoever's going to get those donors is not going to be the person who took you down. So I have to think, and I can't prove this, but in the back of my mind, when all of these folks that are bunched together that are part of an establishment Democratic infrastructure are thinking about going after each other, they may be thinking a little bit about, well, I don't want to make all the donors mad at me because I need to get to Iowa to spend money to talk to voters, right?
That's a good point, Chuck.
Chuck's point about new voters is really important. 9 million new voters that will turn 18 by the 2020 election will be added to the roll. So.
No, and it's
whoever
true.
gets them first.
And we've looked at the polls here. I mean, the under 29 demographic in New Hampshire, who's leading? Andrew Yang. It's really crazy. All right, so final thoughts. We're going to get one from each of you. Colin, you go first.
Let's not have so many debates so that they can be better prepared for it. Mix it up on some real stuff next
Or
time.
less candidates, frankly.
Amen. That too.
All right, what do you think, Andrew?
Not much changes, right? Good night for Warren. Good night for Buttigieg and Biden and Sanders, because not much is going to change. But
I kind of picking up on that. I mean, even though I can't say he performed particularly well, but I think it's a good night for Joe Biden, because if nothing changes, that's a good day for Joe Biden.
He spoke in complete sentences.
He spoke, and he's still a front runner. And I will say his last sentence there was articulate and forceful. And good job, Joe.
No, not too many ums. Look. Nothing's going to change. Every time something doesn't change, it's generally good for Joe. He's sitting pretty up at the top. He's only lost really like 2 points in the RCP polling average since he announced. So I hate to say it, but I think he did a decent enough job for him. I love how I have to be like decent enough. Well, I mean that's generally kind of that's basically
the bar is very low, and he met it.
We are. All right, what do you think, Rachel?
I think to sum up this sort of establishment moderator line, for me was Elizabeth Warren talking about her 2-cent wealth tax when the Washington Post, which sponsored this debate, gave her 3 Pinocchios because it's actually a 6 cent under her own plan. But no one called her on it.
No follow-up, no anything. Yeah, Zed was mentioning that.
Absolutely.
I got 3 radical takeaways from this thing. The first one is I think that Castro was missed tonight. There was nobody talking about some of the things that he's been really good at elevating, right? I think Bernie Sanders,
immigration.
I think Bernie took that void, talking about his immigrant roots, right? And I think that somebody knew, and I'm really proud of my guy for doing that piece, but I want to say on the record that Castro was missed tonight. And then thirdly, I will say that I think the way that we figure out who actually should be in the December debate is, if you follow my Twitter or Bernie's Twitter, is we have a game of horse where we play basketball. And I don't know if you've seen Bernie play basketball, but whoever wins the game of horse and basketball gets to be in the January debate.
All right.
Pete's well said.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I was like, Pete's done.
That's it.
Bernie can beat me. Let's be clear, right?
Guys, thank you so much for staying up late with us. We really appreciate it. Debate coverage fun doesn't end here, though. Tomorrow, the Hill's reporter Julie Manchester is going to share her conversations with the candidates in the spin room. She's gathering us stuff for us right now as we speak, and other debate night observations. The Progressive Change Campaign Committee co-founder Adam Green is going to talk about Elizabeth Warren and why he thought she did a good job tonight.
And the Trump campaign is going to weigh in on the candidate which seems more likely to be their 2020 rival. So we hope you guys enjoyed our live debate coverage. Thank you all for watching. Have a good night, and thank you all seriously so much for staying up late with us watching the pre-show, this late show. It's just amazing. I love reading all the comments
and the
chat while it's all happening. We'll see you guys tomorrow morning.
Good night.